Hey all, Pete here. Thought I was done with all my preseason trapping videos, but I'm going after bobcat this year for the first time actually. Never gone after bobcat, never caught one on purpose. I made some modified some traps for specifically for cats. So I put an expanded pan and some shock springs and things like that. And I was 2 shock springs short. So I was gonna just order 2, and then I thought, shock springs are good to have, especially since I use really long chains on my coyote traps. So I went ahead and ordered 3 dozen, and I'm gonna put shock springs on all my number 4 double longs this year, and then try to get them on another 3 dozen of my number 3s next year, double longs. So since I'm out here, I thought I would do a short video just on shock springs, how I do them. I haven't ever used them a lot, but I have put them on some traps that have longer springs or longer chains, and obviously they recommend them for cat traps. You don't have to use them, but it helps if you only get a toe catch or something. It's harder for the animal to pull out because the spring takes some of the force away. So when you order them, what you'll get is you'll get a bunch of these and a bunch of these, okay? So what you do is to assemble them. Now what I'm doing is they're covered with grease. I'm not going to put them on my traps right now. I'm going to put them on in the field this year because my traps are already stowed in totes. They've been dipped, they've been painted, they've been dipped in FMJ, and they're in totes with sagebrush. And the season, well, we don't have a coyote season here, but I'll start setting the first week of October, and it's September 6th, I think today, 5th or 6th. So I'm less than 30 days out. I'm not going to take my traps out of the totes and start screwing around with them. And I mean, they're soaking up sagebrush smell right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to assemble all these, put S-hooks on them, and then I'll throw them in a little bucket or a bag with some sagebrush. And then I'll put them on in the field. So when I set my number 4s out in the field, I'll just throw one on real quick on each of them, and then they'll be on there. So you take your spring, put one insert in that way, take the other one, slide it in. So this is what you've got, okay? And then you take your J-hook tool. This tool will work fine on the heavier S-hooks. I don't know about the biggest S-hooks, but it works fine on these sort of middle ones. There's light duty, there's heavy duty, and then there's like big, thick ones. And these are the ones I'm using. So you put it through the end, and then you're going to take your J-hook tool and just crimp it down, and I squeeze it real hard at the end. You're going to do it on both sides. I just have gloves on because they're so greasy. And there's what you're left with, okay? Now what I'm doing is I'm throwing these in a 5-gallon bucket, and then I'm gonna dip them in some soak them in some super clean to get the grease off. Then I'll rinse them real good, and I'll throw them in a bucket, a small bucket. With some sagebrush, and just let them soak up the smell. If I could get easily to my tote that's got my number 4s in it, I'd just throw them all in with those, but it's on the bottom of totes stacked up this high full of traps, and I don't want to dig through everything. And so I'll just carry that bucket with me when I go set my number 4s. My number 4s are my most modified traps. They've got the most money into them, and they cost the most to buy, so I only use those on, well, I mainly only trap private land, but I only use my number 4s on private land that's kind of landlocked anyway, so there's almost zero risk of anything getting stolen. you don't have to do all these modifications, but you know, like I always try to make my traps a little better every year, so I don't spend a lot of money at any one time, but I kind of modify over time. And by the time I get those number 4s with added chain, pip hands on them, swivels, I offset them if they aren't offset already, and then I put a spring on them, I'm like 30 bucks, you know, or more into each one of those. I don't want them stolen, you know, so I use my most expensive traps that have the most money into them on land where there's very little chance of anything happening to the trap. Some of my other places I trap where you're bordering places that people are doing a lot of hunting or whatever, you know, I start using my number 3s or my lower end number 3s. Places, there's one place I'm trapping this year that I just got asked to trap. In fact, I got in a little over my head, I think this year. I got a little bit too much area to trap, but I wanted to trap this place because it's good deer hunting too. And like there's a couple strips of private land that's desert land right next to BLM land that gets hunted really hard. In those spots, I'm going to be using my unmodified old, you know, number 3s that I'm in $8 on, you know, and it's like, well, if I lose one, I you know, it makes me upset, but I'm not out a whole bunch of money. So like I said, I'm just going to soak these in Super Clean and then rinse them real good and then throw them in a bucket with some sagebrush, and I'll just put them on the number 4s in the field. Now, a lot of guys, when you put them on your trap chain, a lot of guys like to cut the chain and then crimp the S-hook down on each end of the chain so that the spring is part of the chain. I have some of my traps that way, but I don't like that because these S-hooks, I mean, I trust them, but you know, things can happen, you know, and coyotes, I've caught some big coyotes who have fought those traps pretty hard. So I like to do what the wolf trappers do, and I don't have any traps out right now, so I have to use a number 1 long spring to demonstrate this. So it's a small chain, obviously, but what the wolf trappers like to do is they'll hook into the chain without cutting the chain and leave some slack. That's not enough slack. See, so the spring will work, but if for some reason, if this broke, if one of these S-hooks straightened or something happened, the chain is still hooked up. So the animal's not gonna, you know, it's still restrained. If you cut the chain and make the spring part of the chain, if something goes wrong with the spring, then you may lose the trap and the animal. I don't weld these S-hooks. I know some people just cringed, but I'm not trapping wolves. I'm trapping coyotes and bobcats and fox. So I've never had a coyote straighten a J-hook. I've never had a coyote straighten an S-hook. I have had a coyote straighten an S-hook on a snare, one of the small breakaway S-hooks on a snare. So I don't use S-hook breakaways on snares. I use the J's. But you know, I've never had a coyote straighten one. But in case they did, I do it this way. See, so the chain's still there as a backup, as a plan B. Okay. So that's a real basic explanation of shock springs. Again, as the animal fights the trap, fights the chain, the spring absorbs the shock, makes it harder for the animal to hurt himself and to pull out if it's just a toe catch or something. I mentioned Super Clean in my trap prep video. I talked about how I have to go to Walmart to buy it, and I hate going to Walmart because I don't like supporting big box stores of any kind if I can help it. What I discovered is you can buy Super Clean at any auto parts store, even mom and pop auto parts stores. So there's still a chain, but I'd rather support an auto parts store than Walmart. So if you're like me and you want to support smaller businesses or mom and pop stores, look at an auto parts store for your Super Clean instead of Walmart. Also, I did want to mention, kind of unrelated, but I've mentioned Sleepy Crick traps lots of times, and I just found out recently that Southern Snare Supply purchased Sleepy Crick. Southern Snare Supply is where I like to get my snare supplies because I like Korean cable, and they, in a lot of places, don't specify what kind of cable they sell, and our local place here mainly sells Chinese cable. I don't like Chinese cable. I'm not saying it's bad, I just don't like it. I was told by some wolfers, like legit guys who do this for a living, like they told me don't use Chinese cable. So I'm like, okay, I'm an idiot if I don't listen to wisdom from people who have been doing this longer than I have. So I'm not dissing on you if you use Chinese cable, but I was told by some really experienced guys not to use it. So Southern Snares is where I buy my snare supplies. They have a really good price on snares. They have some other good stuff too. They don't have a huge selection on some things that I like, and they don't carry some things I like, but they bought Sleepy Crick traps. So if you're wanting to be a long spring trapper, and I love long spring traps, and you want to buy American made traps, okay, they're long spring, they're going to be more, Sleepy Cricks are expensive, but they're really well made. Now I have lots of old Victors, I have some old Blake and Lambs, but you know, Victor doesn't make the big number 3, number 4 double longs anymore, and I don't know of any American company that makes that size of double long spring other than Sleepy Crick. And so if you're wanting to get into long spring trapping and you want to buy American made long springs, Sleepy Crick are a good way to go from Southern Snares and Supply. Oneida Victor's website, they do sell some longs. Blake and Lamb started making the Victor started making the Blake and Lamb number 1 long spring again. That's a good long spring for muskrats, about the same price as a Sleepy Crick. I think the Sleepy Crick's actually a little better because you can adjust the pan tension. But anyway, I don't know if Oneida Victor is making those, if they're making them in their company here in the United States, or if they're outsourcing it somewhere overseas. But they're making those, and I think Newhouse, Victor's making a Newhouse number 1 long spring again too, I think. And so those may be made in America. But for the big double longs, the big number 3s and 4s, Sleepy Crick, man, they're good traps, they're good tough traps, and Southern Snares is making them. So if you want to see stuff made in America, folks, buy stuff made in America. Spend a little extra money. There are a lot of good coil springs made in America. I hear really good things about the No BS traps. The MBs are good. I hear really good stuff about some of the stuff Victor's making, the Montgomery Jawless, and I think those are made in America. But you guys, seriously, so many of us are all about America first, but then we buy stuff from overseas because we put the dollar above everything. And I'm telling you, if you buy good traps, they last forever, and you can support the United States by buying stuff made in the USA. So that's my rant. Sorry, I'm done with that. So anyway, shock springs, not absolutely necessary, but definitely an added bonus if you can afford them. Easy to install, and I recommend, you know, just making small modifications on your traps every year. I can't say this enough. This is an old Victor number 3 double long, old pan, everything. I catch lots of coyotes in these. Okay, I do. I catch beaver in them. There's nothing wrong with this trap. Okay, so if that's all you got to get started with long spring trapping, that's fine. But as you're able to over time, it's good to make the trap even more effective with some modifications. Okay, all right, with that, thank you for watching. I'm Pete. Remember, God is great, guns are good, freedom is precious. Pray for our country, pray for our leaders, and be good to your neighbor. Bye.